The Indiana Fever just pulled off one of the biggest roster moves in WNBA history. After securing Caitlin Clark as the #1 overall pick, the Fever didn't just stop there. They went all in, making shocking trades and free agency moves to build a championship-caliber team around her. But are these new additions enough to turn the Fever into serious title contenders? And did they just assemble one of the most dangerous offensive lineups in WNBA history? Stick around, because the Fever's latest signings are shaking up the league in a way nobody saw coming. The Indiana Fever are no longer just a rebuilding team. They are making a statement. They are here to win now. With the selection of Caitlin Clark as the #1 overall pick, they knew they had something special. But what separates a franchise-altering player from just another great talent is the team built around them. And the Fever wasted no time making sure Clark wasn't walking into a roster that would leave her carrying too much of the burden alone. This is how dynasties are built. You get your superstar, and then you surround them with the right mix of veterans, specialists, and rising stars who complement their game perfectly. That's exactly what Indiana has done, and honestly, it's one of the most aggressive and strategic roster overhauls we've seen in the WNBA in a long time. The Fever knew that if they wanted Clark to succeed, they had to do more than just hope for natural team chemistry. They had to actively construct a team that played to her strengths while also covering up her weaknesses. They had to give her players who could stretch the floor, defend at an elite level, and handle the physicality of the WNBA. They weren't just building a roster, they were building an identity. And that's why this off-season has been so historic. Caitlin Clark is already a superstar. We know this. Her ability to shoot from anywhere on the floor, pass like a seasoned pro, and handle defensive pressure is on another level. But even the greatest shooters in history need the right pieces around them. Think about Steph Curry. He thrives because he plays alongside elite defenders, versatile scorers, and high IQ teammates who know how to complement his game. The Fever needed to give Clark that same kind of support. That's where their aggressive free agency moves and trades come in. The Fever knew they needed floor spacing. Clark is a magnet for defenders. If they collapse on her, she needs teammates who can punish defenses with three-point shooting. So they went out and got Sophie Cunningham, one of the most reliable shooters in the WNBA. Cunningham isn't just a spot-up shooter. She's gritty, tough, and plays with an edge. She's the kind of player who gets under opponents' skin, brings fire to the game, and thrives in big moments. Her energy alone changes the tempo of the game, and when you pair that with her ability to drain threes, it's clear why the Fever wanted her next to Clark. Then there's the defensive side of the equation. Everyone knows Clark is an offensive machine, but defense has never been her strong suit. The WNBA is a physical league, and guards who can't hold their own defensively get targeted quickly. The Fever weren't going to let that happen. They brought in Natasha Howard and Dawana Bonner, two elite veteran defenders who can guard multiple positions and bring the kind of toughness and experience that young teams need. Howard is a former WNBA Defensive Player of the Year, and her presence immediately gives the Fever a defensive identity. She's long, athletic, and disruptive, the kind of player who can shut down wings, protect the paint, and switch onto smaller guards if needed. That's exactly the type of help Clark needs. The Fever are showing that they want that ring now, because they have just signed Dawana Bonner to the Indiana Fever for the 2025 season. Bonner, on the other hand, is a matchup nightmare. At 6 feet 4 inches, she's a scoring machine who can also lock down on defense. But more importantly, she's a winner. She's been in deep playoff battles. She's played on championship caliber teams, and she knows what it takes to win at the highest level. You don't just bring in a player like Bonner for the numbers. You bring her in because she's a leader, a competitor, and a player who can push this young core to that next level. With these additions, the Fever didn't just add talent, they added identity. They are now a team that can run the floor, shoot the lights out, defend at an elite level, and physically dominate opponents. And let's talk about how this roster now makes Caitlin Clark even more dangerous. Before these moves, Clark was already a matchup nightmare. Defenders couldn't guard her too closely because she could blow past them, but they also couldn't sag off because she could pull up from the logo and drain a three. Now, she has even more space to operate. With players like Cunningham and Kelsey Mitchell spacing the floor, defenders will have to pick their poison. Do they double Clark and leave a shooter open? Do they play her straight up and risk her dropping 30 on them? There's no good answer. But the real beauty of this lineup, it's not just built for offense. For years, one of the biggest criticisms of Clark's teams at Iowa was that they relied too much on outscoring opponents. If the offense wasn't clicking, they were in trouble. The Fever made sure that won't be the case in Indiana. With Howard and Bonner, this team can lock down defensively and create turnovers that lead to transition offense. And if there's one thing we know about Clark, it's that she is deadly in transition. Give her an open floor and she'll pick apart defenses in seconds. The Fever also needed to add toughness, and that's exactly what they did. Sophie Cunningham is one of the toughest players in the league. She plays with an edge, isn't afraid to get physical, and brings an attitude that fires up her teammates. You need players like that in a locker room. Players who set the tone, who refuse to back down, and who push their team to play with intensity every single night. And let's not forget about Aaliyah Boston. Boston is already a dominant force in the paint, and now she has even more help. Last season she was carrying a massive load inside. Now with Howard and Bonner taking on defensive responsibilities, she can focus more on scoring, rebounding, and anchoring the paint without having to do everything herself. That alone makes her even more dangerous. This is what a franchise-changing off-season looks like. The Fever didn't just add pieces, they built a team that makes sense. They found players who fit together, who bring different skills to the table, and who complement Caitlin Clark perfectly. And what's scary, they're not even done yet. This is just the beginning of what could be one of the greatest team transformations in WNBA history. The Fever aren't just trying to be good, they're building something special. And with Clark leading the way, they might just be unstoppable. The Fever have completely transformed their identity, and with Caitlin Clark at the center of it all, they're poised to become one of the most exciting and competitive teams in the WNBA. But let's not get it twisted. This isn't just about throwing a bunch of talent together and hoping it works. Indiana has built this team with intention, thinking about how each player fits next to Clark, and more importantly, how they can turn this team into a serious title contender as quickly as possible. The Fever aren't looking at this as a multi-year rebuild anymore. They've accelerated the timeline by bringing in veterans who know how to win, shooters who will keep the floor wide open, and defenders who will protect Clark from being constantly targeted on that end of the floor. It's no longer a question of whether the Fever will be competitive. It's a question of how quickly they can become one of the top teams in the league. And let's talk about why this team is perfectly built for Clark's skill set. First, spacing is everything. We've seen what happens when Clark plays in an offense where she has the freedom to move, pass, and score without being trapped in tight defensive schemes. At Iowa, she often faced double and triple teams because opposing teams knew they could afford to collapse on her without worrying about strong secondary scoring threats. That won't happen in Indiana. With Kelsey Mitchell, Sophie Cunningham, and Dawana Bonner, the Fever now have multiple three-point threats that force defenders to stay honest. If defenses try to blitz Clark, they're leaving a deadly shooter open, and Clark, being the elite passer she is, will make them pay every single time. Clark is not just a scorer, she's an elite playmaker. Her court vision, her ability to manipulate defenses with her passing, and her knack for creating opportunities for her teammates are what make her truly special. With this Fever lineup, she doesn't have to do everything herself. She can move off the ball, set up teammates, and pick her spots without constantly being the focal point of every defensive scheme. And that's what's going to make her even more dangerous. Think about how the best shooters in basketball history have operated. Players like Steph Curry, Diana Taurasi, and Sabrina Ionescu thrive in systems where they aren't just primary ball handlers. They're off-ball threats too. Clark is just as lethal running off screens, spotting up for open threes, and using her elite handle to create separation for quick pull-ups. That's why adding multiple ball handlers and scoring options around her was such a smart move by Indiana. Now, when Clark isn't handling the ball, the Fever still have multiple players who can initiate offense, move the ball, and keep defenses scrambling. And let's not overlook what these moves mean for Aaliyah Boston. Boston was the heart and soul of this Fever team last year. She came into the league as a dominant force in the paint, a rim protector, and a player who could take over games when needed, but she was often double-teamed because Indiana didn't have enough perimeter threats to take the pressure off her. That's over. With Clark commanding so much attention on the perimeter, Boston is now in the perfect situation. She's going to get more one-on-one matchups, she's going to have way more space to operate in the paint, and she's going to be an even bigger offensive weapon because teams won't be able to clog the lane against her. This means Boston will not only continue to dominate inside, but she'll also have more opportunities for easy buckets, whether that's through drop-off passes from Clark or simply benefiting from teams having to prioritize defending the perimeter. This is what championship-level team building looks like. But what makes this even more impressive is that the Fever aren't just building for the now. They're building a foundation that can last for years. They're bringing in experienced veterans who can mentor and guide Clark and Boston, ensuring that this young core isn't just learning how to play at the WNBA level, but how to win at the WNBA level. Players like Bonner and Howard bring leadership, playoff experience, and a winning mentality that will help shape the Fever into a team that isn't just competitive for 1 or 2 seasons, but for many years to come. And don't underestimate what having these types of personalities in the locker room can do for a team's culture. Bonner is a proven winner, someone who has played in huge playoff games, someone who understands what it takes to be great at the highest level. Howard is a defensive anchor, someone who will set the tone for how hard this team plays every single night. And Cunningham, she's the firecracker, the gritty competitor who will do all the little things to ignite this team's energy when they need it most. These are the kinds of players that turn a young, talented team into a serious contender. The Fever have completely flipped their narrative in a matter of months. They went from being a bottom-feeder team with potential to a franchise that's making all the right moves to set themselves up for sustained success. And let's be honest, this isn't just about the Fever. The entire WNBA is watching this team very closely. With the way Clark has already taken over the headlines, the Fever are about to become one of the most watched teams in the league. They're going to get more national TV games, they're going to draw bigger crowds, and they're going to have an insane amount of attention on them every single night. That's pressure. But here's the thing, this roster is built to handle it. Clark is used to playing in the spotlight. She's used to having millions of eyes on her. She's used to carrying a team, and she's used to delivering in big moments.